trust that everybody here understands the difference between philosophizing and philosophizing. And if you don't, then you will have to go to Iowa for 1,000 years. We will begin the morning with singing, and then we will commence with our final plenum session. I will provide a few introductory remarks, and then the plenum session will begin with each one of our presenters here, who have also been participants. You know, they've been playing a dual role, and I think we should probably all give them a hand right now. It took some courage to subject oneself to such a task of having to play two roles simultaneously, and you've all done an excellent job. In any case, they will all have an opportunity to still a few more remarks from them, and then we will open up into the larger circle for our final session. Veronica? Yep. There you are.
Okay, our round. In the head, the power of faith. Let's try it. In the head. Two intervals that come in here because they're really remarkable for the song. It's the first one, this jump, and it comes again, the might of love, the same interval there. It's an octave, and Steiner doesn't say very much about music, and what he says is very, very difficult. But he points to the octave as an interval that in the Waldorf schools they should really address after 12. I don't know why. And it's a mystery, the octave. It's an absolute mystery. When men and women sing supposedly the same note, we actually sing in an octave. Because men's voices go down in puberty, women's a little bit, but not quite like that. It's the end of the scale when you meet again the new tone, the same tone, but in a new form. So it's really, you could also say it encompasses the whole human being, the octave. It's the framework of the whole scale in between with all its mysteries in there. So it's a very special interval. We mostly experience it as very empty, which means we are not quite there yet. Yeah, we don't experience yet the fullness of that octave, the beauty of it, the richness. Like the interval we just ended on when we had that little improvisation, wasn't that nice? Oh, it feels so good. It's the third, it's long past really, as far as music history and our development goes, but we still love it. It just feel good. And the octave should have that richness. And for most of us it doesn't. And we haven't quite entered it fully. So in that way you could also say it's an interval of the future still. But it's the most mysterious one, and it really relates to our humanity very, very strongly. And so there she puts, the composer puts this interval in this song twice. And she did that on purpose, not just because it seemed nice. There's a lot of meaning behind that. So enjoy it as it comes. In the head and really grasp it there. So let's try it. In the head. so good, you almost could do it by yourselves over here. How about if I sing along with you and we are the third group? So you need to sing softly enough you can hear these here, okay? But not as a round yet. You sing whenever I conduct you, and it might be right in the middle of it. So be ready. You continue the phrase. Just have one melody now, not a round. Okay, so you pick it up whenever I come to you. You pick up the phrase where it is, and you stop. Yes, please. Eugene, could you be over here, please? With this group here, okay? And you sing first. All right, now let's try it around. Sing quietly so we can hear something. Okay? And do way more listening than singing as far as your interactivity goes. Are we start? No, actually, we should come last. So I can bring you next. We're supposed to sing. Yes, sorry, I thought I said that. Now we do the round. I'm really intimidated, this group here. All right?
Now we are at our final session. And it would be quite understandable if people really felt that the whole question of product, how do we make all of this effective, really comes into play. We've been in process. What is the product? I am going to suggest to us that the whole process that we've been through has been the product. And that we can relax. It's not like we have to produce some major insight about what it means to be human in the 21st century. However, the last session is a special session. There's no question about it. It cannot continue just to simply be like the other sessions, which were of a conversational nature. I'm very grateful to Sophia for introducing the metaphor of the time capsule, because in some respects I feel that what we have done here in these days is like a time capsule. It may not be effective tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but in the stream of time, what we have done here, I think we can rest assured, will make a difference. The thoughts that we have thought, the process that we've been through. So thank you very much for that metaphor. I think it's quite fitting for this effort. In order to do this, I feel that each one of us has to try to come to the essential, to the essence of what they have been experiencing in these days. Each one of our presenters will attempt to do that in very short presentations. And then you will be invited to chime in. I'm going to restrict you to only one contribution. You're not going to be allowed to make a second or a third. And I'm also going to ask people to be very brief and succinct in what they have to say, which will allow other people also, perhaps, to make contributions. Is that all very clear? Yeah. Good. Now, I want to just point out that last night, because I think it's always important to link a little bit back to the night before, we had some wonderful presentations. Each one of them was so different. And each person, you really experienced how they really spoke out of their heart, out of the core of their being. And they had that in common. And wasn't it remarkable that it was framed by two particular presentations? One, on one end, was really a plea for robust inclusion, an inclusion that would include those people, those human beings who are about to be born, who may be developmentally disabled. You remember this? And she identified 4 things that would be important in order to promote this kind of inclusion. 3 of them I will mention to you. They were a different vocabulary. You need a different vocabulary. You need an expanded understanding. And you also need to be free from conventional thoughts and conventional ideas and presuppositions. Those were the 3. There's a 4th, I'm not going to go into that. That appeared on one end. On the other end, Eugene Schwartz, Being Human, the Cosmic View. And I felt, these two belong so much together because he spoke about these incarnating beings in a very specific and particular way. And I thought that these 3 things, a different vocabulary, an expanded understanding, and the willingness to overcome conventional presuppositions applies to this also. So there we are last night with these 2 presentations framing. And then I mentioned Sophia's already. Thomas, thanks very much for directing our attention to the power of association. In the morning yesterday, Steve Usher said technology is probably inevitable, but let's never get it confused or think it's going to be a substitute for the face-to-face meeting, the encounter from one human being to another. And the way you spoke last night about the associative activity in your area is a testimony to the power of what happens when people meet together. And also that is a good indication for our efforts here too. We have come together and met face to face. And then finally, all of this, and I am now going to step down, really is asking us, what is the story? What is the story of this symposium? So in a sense, in this plenum session, we are telling the story, or maybe beginning to tell the story of this 50th anniversary symposium. So thank you, presenters, for providing me all the material I needed for my introduction this morning. And I think you're just going to go right now.
How long do we have? How long do we have?
Oh, I think that you were advised not to speak for more than 5 minutes.
Me first?
Yes.
Okay. Well, on the spot. Pardon?
Loud.
Yes, loud. Well, for me, this symposium has been something completely different. A lot of it is completely brand new to me. The ideas of anthroposophy, the experience of what Camp Hill is, and what it's like to stay in Camp Hill, as Judith and I and Lara have stayed in Serena House, and really getting that the sense of being enveloped by nature. And all of these things together have produced an experience that is completely transformative in the way that I'm approaching life and the way that I'm asking questions. And I thought I had already asked some pretty good questions already, but over the course of this week, brand new questions have come up. And what I'm getting from that is this feeling of always being in search of the new questions to be asking, and the better questions, and transcending those base questions that we might have of what's wrong with things, and really looking for the what's right, and really putting all of my own personal energy into finding the value in what I'm surrounded by. And so what I can really get from this whole symposium is a way to go back out into the world and having a new story to tell.
Thank you. Two things, I think. When I said last night that I have a core story, which is true, I realized much later that I didn't say that we don't only have one story. We clearly have both personally many stories, but inside the beingness of being human, the presence here, we have lots and lots of other stories. And one that's important for me is the Christian metaphor. And it's over 10,000 years old. So the resources that are available to me, because I have that inside me, are huge. So I really felt the need to say that, so that you get the sense that we have lots and lots of stories to play with, both personally and socially, in the choreography of becoming human together. We have this cornucopia of stories to play with, and we can pull them forward or drop them back as the need arises. So it had me waking up this morning and having breakfast in Serena House, thinking, oh, I would just love to spend a good piece of time exploring the choreography of storytelling. And just it's there, you know, I don't know. It's there. Maybe that could be explored or not. For myself personally, in this last few days, I've had wonderful conversations, but particularly the one with Veronica about improvisation. And in the core of that conversation, what I came to understand is that the power of the will can be released through exploration of rhythm. And that's huge, I think, because of what Stephen's struggling with. It's like, how do you pass the message on a soul level in an authentic way so that the person has the power without having to be told exactly what to do? And I think that's really one of the core questions in here, is as we move through the next century, right? How can people authentically carry the soul of this, the life of this, but do it in different ways? Because it's a different world now, right? So she knows something. You guys need to know. I really can't say it better than that, I don't think. There's so many resources inside this group of people, and I don't think you know how resourceful you can be with each other. Can you create spaces, really listening spaces for each other? I think that would be huge, because you know so much. But you get caught up in the daily life, as we all do, and I don't know that you know how much you know. I actually have a third thing. I'll be brief, I promise. I got a lot out of what Eugene said about this group of souls that are incarnating without being fully prepared, and doing it as rapidly as possible so that they will be present on the planet right now during this incredibly transformative period. And it just clicked with me, like, no wonder there's this whole bunch of people here now that only have very short stories. They don't have the time. They haven't had the time to bring with them a longer story. So no wonder they're arriving in this very different way. And it just really, really made it make sense for me. And the point is that we are gifts for each other. As I said last night, not that one's good, one's bad, but inside the choreography, it's all gift. And what we get to do is figure out how to dance with the gifts in a way that really creates the world for each other. Thank you.
Oh, I thought I was all talked out. I didn't really have any more to say. I want to pick up on the fourth point that Shelley mentioned, that you left out. Which was the support for care. And I wouldn't talk about that because, a philosopher is supposed to be a thinker, but I want to talk about, and there's been so much talk about thinking and new ways of thinking in these few days. But I think that thinking has to, and I'm sure you do, because you do it, that thinking is always in a dialectic with practice. And it's the practice that I find so impressive here. And that, of course, I've learned a tremendous amount from the conversations, but I've also learned so much just from the practice at Camp Hill and in what I see around me. And that's a practice of taking care of one another. And I think that if there is something to being human, a recent anthropologist, evolutionary biologist, Sarah Hardy, has written a book called Mothers, Others. And in it, she puts forward the view that what makes us distinctively human is the fact that we are the only great ape. We are the only ape that does shared caregiving. It's not that we're the only species that does shared caregiving. We're the only ape that does shared caregiving. That is to say, a chimpanzee mother will never let go of her infant. She will not even give her infant to her own mother because there's too much danger there. And it's in our shared caregiving with the kinds of cognitive capacities that we have as apes that we have evolved into the kinds of creatures that are empathetic, that have the capacities for social cooperation, that have the capacities to create situations like this. And it is in that capacity of shared caregiving, of living together, finding new ways of caring for each other, caring for the earth, right? Caring for the other creatures that we live together with, that I think the possibility of finding our full humanity, the Übermensch that is sometimes thought of as being more intelligent or being, I don't think it's there that we should look. It's in this practice of caring for one another and finding new and wonderful ways and imaginative and innovative ways of caring for one another. And that's what I sort of came to, and that's what was brought out to me, and I've learned enormous amounts of that. Thank you.
That's a real gem, thank you.
It's interesting because I had prepared very carefully for the other remarks that I made here. But I think because of taking the clowning workshop, I realized that sometimes it's interesting to just come and then see what happens. And what came to me is actually a song that I love. So I'd like to sing just a little bit, and you can join in if you know this song. What wondrous love is this in my soul, in my soul? What wondrous love is this in my soul? What wondrous love is this?
Lay aside the curse for my soul, for my soul. My soul. Thank you. I found myself thinking about connections between things that have been said here and what other intentional community movements have done when they turn 50 or 70 years old. And now I'm going to rattle through a couple quickly. Most intentional community movements turn to compost by the time they're 50 or 70 years old. Their ideas have been totally given back to the larger stream of human history, and Campbell's chosen not to do that. those that don't turn to compost do what Judith told us and tell the stories. About 70 years, give or take, I don't have Google with me, after St. Benedict wrote the monastic rule that guided monastic communities in the West, Pope Gregory the Great put together the stories, not just of Benedict, but of the very humble kitchen miracles that happened to the people around Benedict. Bowls getting broken and repaired through the love of the community. So telling those stories is one thing that can be done. Another thing with the Benedictines, as Tom talked about, repairing broken food systems. At the same time he was writing those stories, Gregory, as Bishop of Rome, found a way to keep the food coming to the city of Rome when the empire that had been doing that work was collapsing all around him. He said, we need to come up with new ways based in communities to bring the grain, not the truffles, but the grain from other places to that very crowded city.
That's where they went wrong.
Third thing, and now I'm going to jump from the Benedictines to the Shakers. When the Shakers were about 50 years old, they started listening to their young people in a new way. There was this great phenomenon called Mother Ann's work, where spirit messengers started coming to the young people in Shaker communities with these beautiful pictures of spiritual realities, and that generated new life and vitality in those communities. And then a little bit later, maybe about the time Shakers were about 70 years old, so the age of Camp Hill internationally, they began to notice that a lot of people were doing the same sorts of things they were doing. A guy named Frederick Evans started saying, you know, we've been doing our own little thing, and now look, there's all these other communities springing up. There's people who care about the things we care about. We need to share, and we need to learn from them and share what we have to offer with them. And he said that for a while, and most Shakers said, no thank you, and didn't choose that path that was put out before them. I feel like in this symposium, the kind of people that have been invited up here, Camp Hill is doing that thing. Wow, look at these other people who are doing things similar to us. What might grow out of our conversation? And that brings me to Brooklyn. I've been really excited to hear about Brooklyn from Sophia this week because I have new reasons to be in Brooklyn. My wife's son has recently moved to Brooklyn, and I'd passed through the train from JFK Airport to Manhattan, but I'd never stopped in Brooklyn before. A couple weeks ago, I'm going again in a couple weeks. And Brooklyn is so far from Camp Hill, and yet there are so many of the same things happening in Brooklyn and in cities like that. The same fervor of international presence, people from every corner of the world, and the same love of the land, of farming, is just springing up in our cities. And what surprises there might be in a meeting if there were some way for you or others to invite this conversation to take another step in Brooklyn, and just be open to what might happen from that. 70 years ago, when Carl Koenig arrived in Scotland, or maybe it's 72, whatever, he said that what he was trying to do was to preserve a kernel of that true European spirit that had been so buffeted by fascism and war. And you've done that. And now it might be time to go to the places that are asking, how can the true American spirit rejuvenate itself after sloughing off empire, oil economy, all the things that have dampen down the true mission of America. And that's the question with which I'll end. Thank you.
I think I'd like to take Dan's comments one step further, in that process of sharing. I think one thing that's become very apparent to me recently, and also through the process of being here and understanding what has been so successful about the Camp Hill community here, is the interdependency and the acceptance that, I guess, the flow that occurs between acknowledging the need on either side and on so many levels, and the sharing that occurs across. And one of the things that I have struggled with at times where I felt like I was whole and I was successful is that I shut myself off from accepting that I was interdependent, and I see that on a human level here, there has been such great success in sharing that interdependency. But I think perhaps what Dan was suggesting is moving that sharing to a broader community level, and I think that perhaps one piece of that will be really important is accepting that need and just acknowledging, so that flow of sharing can begin to initiate. Thank you.
Well, I've had many remarkable conversations and heard many extraordinary stories. Yesterday, Judith roped me into a conversation, and at the end of it, I told her something, and she said, "Well, you must share this." And I said, "Well, you know, there's been such an information overload," as one person said to me, and I didn't know whether I should. And she said, "Well, you should tell it anyway because it's hopeful and people will understand that there's hope in it." So I will tell you 3 stories. They're stories, but they're all historically true stories. The first one happened here in Pennsylvania many years ago, I imagine in the 60s or the 50s. There was a woman driving down a backcountry road. It was winter, it was dusk, the sun was setting, and the roads were covered with snow. And the road she was going down was sort of a horseshoe down and then back up. And as she got to the bottom of the horseshoe, her car went out of control, and it wound up straddling the road with the front tires in a ditch. And she began to panic because she was very frightened that another car would come around this corner, and if it did, it wouldn't be able to stop, it would crash into her. And she became more and more anxious when suddenly, to her astonishment, she saw a young man walking across a field. This was just out in the middle of the farm country. And she said he had the strangest appearance because it was quite cold, but he had his coat just over his arm. And he walked up to the car, and she said it was extraordinary. He more or less communicated with her telepathically. He lifted the car out of the ditch, put it onto the road, and then waved and walked down the road. And she was utterly astonished, got back into her own wits, took off down the road to thank him. There was no one there. That's the first story. The second story, and it's a real story. I know the person who had the experience. She's since died. The second story is of a man who was sitting in a train. His business was going bankrupt. He was in total despair, and he was contemplating suicide. And as he sat there, there was someone in the row across from him in the train who turned to him, touched his shoulder, and said, "Don't worry, liquidate what you have, you'll find that you can go on." And the man's entire state of soul was changed. He thought for a minute, he looked back, and there was no one there. And it happened as he had been told. Now, the last story I want to tell you is from Rudolf Steiner, and I never make apologies for reading Steiner. Now, this is part of a book which is quite important. I published it long ago, and it's called The Reappearance of Christ in the Etheric World. And Rudolf Steiner says this: "The truth is that Christ has come to him," so this is someone in despair, "although he believes that what he sees is a physical man. He will come to realize, however, that this is a supersensible being, because it immediately vanishes. Many a human being will have this experience when sitting silently in his room, heavy-hearted and oppressed, not knowing which way to turn. The door will open, and the etheric Christ will appear and speak words of consolation to him. The Christ will become a living comforter of men. However strange it may as yet seem, it is true, nevertheless, that many a time when people, even in considerable numbers, are sitting together, not knowing what to do and waiting, they will see the etheric Christ. He himself will be there, will confer with them, will cast his word into such gatherings. We are now approaching these times, and the positive, constructive element now described will take hold of the evolution of humanity. No word shall be said here against the great advances made by modern culture in our day. These achievements are essential for the welfare and the freedom of human beings. Whatever can be gained in the way of outer progress, however, in mastering the forces of nature, is something small and insignificant compared with the blessing bestowed upon the person who experiences the awakening in his soul through Christ, who will now take hold of human culture and its concerns. What thereby awakens in human beings will be unifying positive force. Christ brings constructive forces into human civilization. That's what I wanted to share this morning, and thank you, Judith, for putting me up to it.
The question that I carry out of these days is, why is it I always get to speak after people who have told the most incredible stories? So, I'll try the best I can. Every June, I lead 3 short conferences in this hall for Waldorf teachers for grades 1, 2, and 3. And at the end of these conferences, which are very intense and really try to get people prepared in an incredibly short period of time for the year to come, we have the evaluation session, either in conversation or people write something out. We'll say, you know, how was the conference? Oh, 2 answers usually. One is, Eugene, it was really helpful. I feel incredibly prepared. But, you know, mostly what I'm going to remember are my days in this Camp Hill village. It was really amazing. Or number 2, the other common answer is, it was really great. I'm ready to go into grade 2, but I actually think this is going to be my last year as a teacher. Why? I think I want to be a Camp Hill co-worker. I looked on the map and thinking, we desperately need Waldorf teachers, and here I am recruiting for Camp Hill. But that is the power of this experience. And there's an interesting polarity that arises in the conference between the 5 to 10 very fortunate people who get to live on the campus for those 3 nights, and the 20 who do not, who complain bitterly about having to drive 5 or 10 minutes through ordinary Pennsylvania before they cross the threshold of the enchanted garden. You see, do you know what it's like to go back to my hotel in Chester Springs after this? I don't want to do it. I'll sleep in my car. I'll park somewhere. People have done that. They have a hotel room and they actually want to be here. So that's the power, which of course those of us who are more in the midst of it don't always recognize what it's like to be here. Now, Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that Rudolf Steiner said that after 72 years, that period that Dan brought up, an organization, a corporation, like a human being, dies in a certain way, whether we actually physically die at that time or not. But there is something that changes profoundly. And Steiner spoke of a human being in a way. All old karma now just continues via momentum, but every new friendship we make, every new experience we have after 72 is already moving into our next lifetime. And he suggested on an organizational level that age 72 is the time, as it were, to liquidate, to dissolve the assets, and start new little spin-offs, to become entrepreneurial all over again. Now, I'd say one need not do that in a certain respect. That would be, you know, what about all the buildings, all the mortgages, and all of that? It's going to happen anyway. And I'll tell you how it's happening in the American Waldorf movement, which where there are, in a way, the movement is about 72 years old, even though there are a couple of schools older. Kimberton is one of the oldest. It's about that age. Now, charter schools, public Waldorf schools, are beginning. So you have, for the first time, parents who come to the school not the least bit vested in Waldorf education. The outer world is streaming into Waldorf education big time. And schools don't quite know what to do, how to get these parents to establish a rhythm at home, how to keep media away, how to have the children dressed properly and with lunch boxes that don't advertise Teenage Ninja Turtles or whatever is next all over them. It's a very big deal, and the Waldorf Schools Association has found a very elegant solution. You make it illegal to use the word Waldorf unless you are a private independent school. It's against the law to come from the outside world and say, we want Waldorf as well. You can get sued, maybe even arrested for doing that. That's one solution. It's like eating a lot of pomegranates to stay eternally young. So you're never going to age. Nobody will ever know you're 72 or older. That's one solution. In the Camp Hill movement, from what I hear, this is true of those I know in the UK and Ireland as well, we have now the day student, as it were, not spending the night and sleeping on campus. We have the day worker, not spending the night and sleeping on campus. What it means when people sleep in close confines, sleep on the same sort of patch of earth, the powerful spiritual capacities that intensify when that happens, what it means when people, as it were, alternate and come from one world into this. And as I said, these teachers immediately get it. It's really, really different. The people who slept here come into the day in a very different way than those of us who slept 5-10 minutes away, a few miles away. So this is something streaming in. And how is Camp Hill going to, in a way, completely reform to deal with those who come and go, for whom day and night, sleeping and waking, are in significantly different worlds? So I think that this is a question. Technology comes into it. What people are eating, from which soil their food comes, very, very powerful, day and night. How modern culture in the modern world flows in and out, as it were. It's going to be an entirely new breathing experience, and we might say it's no longer, as Judith pointed out, the story of 72 years ago, and that indefatigable group of refugees making their way to England and making their way out of the internment camps. Now it's going to be the future streaming towards Camp Hill and all other institutions like it. And I think here amongst this group of remarkable people, in a way, the future is speaking in a very wonderful way, and I feel very privileged to be a part of that.
I really get to go last. One of the reasons why Rudolf Steiner was so prolific is that he was instilled with a deep sense of urgency. There is a lot that needs to be done. When people have visited our area and visited the farms and the businesses and the organizations and heard about what's going on up in Vermont, many people have asked me, what is the biggest contribution from your region to the rest of the world? They're, of course, thinking about cheese or some sort of a blueprint or a model to replicate what we've done. And my answer for a number of years has been the same, and it hasn't really shaken too much, and that is inspiration. Our biggest export is inspiration. This is, of course, through the telling of stories, but the reason why stories need to be told and lead to that inspiration is because the inspiration then leads to action. If we know that there is something wrong, but we aren't hearing stories about bringing relevance to that or a solution to that or at least an inkling of hope to that, then the inspiration that leads into action is a lot harder to manifest. And I think there are a lot of people right now that are looking for that inspiration so they know what action to take. I think also people are waiting for something big to happen before they act. I know that you guys have a power plant you don't like right up the hill there. That was something, a big thing, that led many people to act boldly. It's easy when it takes the form of a very clear thing like that. What's harder is when over 50 years, tiny little things happen every moment going down a path. And what happens is that as humans, we tend to normalize these things in little teeny pieces as they go. 20 years ago, if you had announced what the rate of heart disease was going to be in this country now, that would have been the wake-up call for people back then. But 1 year at a time, everybody normalizes each of those things. And so it's not smacking you right in the face. So what I want to say, semi-crudely here, is that don't wait, because the shit has hit the fan already. Camp Hill is like a little tiny seed. Seeds are small, they're very quiet, and they are very concentrated and very powerful. And they sit and they wait for the time to be right. And there are many different kinds of plants in this world. Some like the May apples that are getting ready to flower in the woods around here, make 1 seed per plant per year. That's it. Those are plants that grow up in stable forests. There are another type of plant out there, and those are the weeds. The role of the weeds and the plants that make many seeds on this planet is to help bring health to a disturbance. When there is a landslide, when there is a tree that falls and light shines into a dark chunk of woods, how is it that there are some plants that make only 1 seed each year, and there are others that make 500,000 seeds each year? They play different roles in the ecology of this planet. So when I say that Camp Hill is a seed, I think you might guess what kind of seed I think you are. It is not the seed that makes only 1 more. There is a disturbance out there, and there is an urgency out there. So be that seed that makes 10,000, 50,000, or 100,000 more of yourselves. You can take that metaphor into whatever specific direction it leads you. Don't be so quiet. And don't wait anymore if you feel it. Be bold, because without telling your story boldly and loudly, the world doesn't get a chance to hear it. And those stories are the seeds that we need for the disturbance, for the destruction we see around us, in order to heal it. I've enjoyed my days here quite a lot. Thank you.
So we now come to the moment in our session where those of you sitting and who have been listening are invited to stand up and speak very loudly and clearly. Do you all hear me? And to bring forward something of the essence of what you've experienced in these days in the same way that our presenters have done it. And I'm going to take a chair and put it on the stage here so I can see and direct, because I'm sure that there are many people who would like to say things. So, who would like to go first? Aha, we have a winner.
I would just like to second what Tom said. I'm Patty Lemmer. I'm with Developmental Delay Resources, a nonprofit for people with disabilities. And the urgency is just enormous. And 3 years ago, when I discovered Camp Hill, I started going to different locations. And I heard what Richard opened with, which was that we could open a Camp Hill every month. And I say, just do.
Nigel.
Thank you, Colin. The one word that has cropped up several times as the array of marvelous speakers talked to us was story. Tell your story. Tell this story. Tell another story. Tell Camp Hill's story. And I think I completely agree with that. I want to say we were told before the speakers began to talk that we should talk out of our stomach or our soul of anything that's pressing on us that needs to. And out of listening to all of this, something has come very much to the front of my mind. And it has not been mentioned since we've been here. We have talked quite a lot about the technological tsunami that is upon us. And my comment about that is that indeed everything said about it is true, but be comforted. There have been technological tsunamis before. Somebody mentioned to the Gutenberg Bible to me in a recent conversation. And that was caused the most greatest panic in the Catholic Church that could possibly be imagined. Simple people were actually going to read the Bible. Can you imagine anything more terrifying? So, everybody got used to that in the end, and that problem disappeared and a new one came. Believe me, in 10 or 20 years, the tsunami of communication will have been absorbed by humanity in one way or another. Yes, we've all got to learn to swim in it and to profit from it if we can, but it's not going to be a long-lasting problem. There are the two things, one of which has been talked about here briefly, and then the third one which I want to talk about, I'll talk about it briefly. We watched Al Gore slog round the country like a voice crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, and for goodness sake stop warming up the planet. And everybody listened to him, they gave him a Nobel Prize, and as far as I can see, nobody has taken very much notice at all, be it in the new countries where they're saying, well, it's not fair for you to restrict us, you've been messing up the planet, it's our turn. Unfortunately, those of us who have been messing up the planet are continuing to do so. There is one other thing that's happening that I think is awful, and I would like people to become aware of, and we could begin to tell that story. And that is the loss of noblesse oblige. There are people in high, wealthy places in this country these days, particularly in America. I can't speak for the rest of the world, and I suppose in the world, perhaps you don't want me to speak anything so locally as merely this continent, but I'm going to, just briefly. It used to be that when people had a great deal of money and so forth, on the one hand they were delighted with that and they went on using it and that was their pond and they felt a certain justification, but they also felt an impulse to make sure that some of their good stuff was shared. Bill Gates is not a businessman whose business practices I admire much, but he has been a very, very good, he has definitely a sense of noblesse oblige and has made huge contributions to different causes. But as we saw in the recent meltdown, there are now corporations that are bigger than many countries. There are corporations bigger than some big countries. And there are people who are running these corporations who are only interested in making the money, and they were quite happy to put people who could not afford it into mortgages they would not be able to maintain to make themselves a huge amount of money. The last 10 years have seen this huge transfer of wealth from the poor and middle to the very wealthy, which I think is absolutely gross. And until we need a building wave of resentment to stop this, and the story needs to be told.
Every day of the week has a different feel to it, and we know that there are certain forces that are ready for our use on each given day of the week, and there are certain qualities that have come to us through cosmic forces for each day of the week, so that you can feel when it's a Tuesday and you can feel when it's a Wednesday. But my feeling on this Friday is that this is a Sabbath day. As soon as I walked in, it felt like a Sunday for me, and I am renewed in the joyful knowledge that the true sacrament is in the meeting of another human being.
Annie.
Thank you. I wish I had a poem or something written, but I told not to.
Would you like to read your poem?
I would, but I'm going to have someone else to have their share. But what Judith said, I think I'm going to go home written with my story of Camp Hill, how I met my boyfriend, and how I came to Camp Hill. And I just want to say thank you, Judith, for talking to you yesterday, and Sophia showing the light about welcoming other people and listening, and to Tom, knowing about the way of the land, and Eugene of the way technology and growth are, and being one of the poetic people I met is Dan. talking about the seeds and everything. And I just want to say thank you. So do you.
Well, I don't want to say, but I have a little poem in my hand.
Christopher, if you want to read your poem, why don't you stand up and turn around and face everyone?
Yeah.
That would be probably the...
Well, a poem, I'm going to give it, and then I'm going to explain it.
Nice and loud.
Are you an Indian tribe? Where did I come from? Are you the birth of the sun? Where do I belong? What do the plants plant? Are you all graceful? Are you goodful? Are you peaceful? What are you made of? Why are you so wild? What makes you the warmest? Are you the element? Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to say something?
You know, I don't think it would be right to leave this gathering without mentioning one more aspect of where Camp Hill in North America is standing and how we all come to be here together today. It is not only the 50th anniversary of Camp Hill in North America, it is also the 25th anniversary of the passing of Carlo Pietzner. And Carlo, in his founding impulses and the creativity and generosity of his spirit, was a major creative force in creating what we now all recognize as Camp Hill in North America. And many of us still feed off the impulses that he could set in our region. So I wanted to be sure that his name has sounded also in this gathering before we go apart today.
Michael?
Well, I might add that Carlo Pietzner painted this altarpiece and also did the stained glass work. You might want to just go up if you have a chance and haven't done so onto the apps and just take a look later, of course, at the two stained glass pieces that he installed with Walsh. At the beginning of our symposium, Richard mentioned three soul potentials that we would have at the beginning, the advent of the 21st, the 21st century, or the 20th century, the 21st, no, 21st. And one of those had to do with this capacity for the divine in me, if you will, to meet the divine in you, for the eye, for my eye, for us to have a true eye-to-eye meeting, which Becky also mentioned, which inspired me to perhaps say a note or two. I'm in a position in Pemberton Hills, and have been for many years, of having to, I suppose many of us are this way, but I particularly have to interface with folks all the time who have no prior experience in anthroposophy in Camp Hill, and we have to cooperate, agencies, institutions, organizations, and so on. And I have to find ways to see to it that we can fruitfully interact and yet that the integrity and the essence of Kimberton Hills is not in any way significantly compromised through that interaction. So I constantly have to be figuring out how am I going to say something that expresses something of ourselves in a language, and again I'll invoke, Coleman mentioned Shelley's point about vocabulary, new vocabulary. What new vocabulary am I going to develop that's going to help us have a true meeting, an effective meeting? And I was shocked this morning before we came in, and I just want to weave in that somebody mentioned the word super sensible on the stage this morning. I can't remember who it was. And that word, of course, is an essential common word in the vocabulary of people involved with anthroposophy. And we think, well, it's this spirit. The spirit. It has to do with thinking. It has to do with beings and so on. Well, none of this really is terribly effective in meeting folks out in the world. And I was shocked to realize that I hadn't, in the past, used something that's pretty straightforward in helping to build that bridge in terms of our understanding of the super-sensible. Although we do speak of the spiritual hierarchies, which also isn't terribly helpful in this way, I haven't used and I haven't experienced too much of us using the terms that super-sensible has to do with the source and the realm of love, harmony, morality, the formative forces that weave through the genetic blueprints, you will, life, motivation and will, and personality, individuality, and so on. So I just wanted to share that.
One thing that has flowed through a little bit of our conversation this morning but hasn't been so strong, and I think it needs to be strengthened, is the role of art. And I think each of us in this experience of being together has had an enhancement of our experience because of the artists who have brought something from the future to us so that we could be in the present in a new way. And it isn't unusual for Camp Hill to work with arts. There it is, you know? Look at those beautiful artists who have emerged out of us. And out in the hallway are Richard Neal's paintings, and of course you just mentioned Carlo's paintings, and we know that Coleman is a comedian. And even when he isn't trying. But I want to especially thank the artists because I have heard so many comments about what people have experienced as a result of these two moments in art in our afternoons and the singing in the morning. So thank you all, and you know, I'd love for you to stand up and get a wild round of applause, but I know artists are sometimes shy.
Peter, before you speak, I had one person who wanted to still say something.
My name is Jay, and I don't presume to know so much about the Camp Hill movement and all of what it entails. But I see such a devoted group of people, and of course, the idea of Camp Hill is a marvelous thing. And I want to add an aspect, which is really a short question. The aspect concerns goals, and it ties in a little bit what Stern said, and then what Patty brought up about her wish to have a Camp Hill founder every month. But I think that we do need a goal. Camping does need a goal, and I don't know what the board of directors thinks. But certainly maybe by the 100th anniversary, there'll be 20 more campgrounds. And then maybe by the 150th anniversary, once things get ramped up, maybe there'll be a Camp Hill every 5 years, a new camp developed. And then what about a Camp Hill every year? I mean, I can conceive it. Once things get ramped up and you're on the train and the train is going, a Camp Hill every year. So my question is, what if? What if?
On a practical note, for those who would like to take their artwork home, I do have another piece of paper that can be put on top of it and taped, so you can transport it without decorating your entire car with many different colors. And I think that one of these were, for those who weren't there, these were actually spiritual portraits of the person in front of them, that they had to do a color portrait of what they experienced of the person vis-a-vis them. So you can guess, I mean, it's pretty obvious with some of them who it is. But you might want to inquire. It's very much this experience of art in between the, as a process, as really to aid the process. And I think Camp Hill has from the start seen that. And in that context, as a poet, I've worked with many other poets of the Camp Hill movement, some here, some who are like Carlo, who was deceased, but who really created a space for that art to be. And I wanted to read this one poem called What We Are, because we've been, you know, this is, you might want to find what are we? It's been the kind of what we're talking about. Okay. Oral classes, yeah. No one wants to tell you what everyone tries to forget. But I will tell you what we are. Because you are ruined and your wound will not let you forget. There's this world, and then the other one. Yes, there is another one. All madness comes from knowing that. For if there's more than one, there may be many. And which, if any, is our home, where we are safe? There isn't any. Our life is one free-falling in between. We flail about, flapping our arms, trying hard to swim, dreaming of flight, while all the while failing and falling in between. Until the miracle occurs, and on the thin night air, we learn to walk. Revolving worlds evolve, die and dissolve. They are mere stepping stones that mark our trail. For what we are is the blue flash of genius in between, uniting worlds with undivided light.
I'm
pretty much going to echo what everyone else said, but I am very much against the notion of Camp Hill spreading everywhere, every year, and whatnot. This is my first year back in Camp Hill, but I'm making another year to commit to Camp Hill for next year, and I don't know what next year will hold for me. I like Camp Hill. I love being there. I have so much to learn and to grow. But this idea comes from the notion, well, I guess, comes from recognizing the importance of urgency in telling the story, but on the flip side, also recognizing the importance of listening to the stories that people tell in patience. Maybe it's a view that is shared more so by the younger generation, but perhaps by the older generation too. But the human progress that at least I would like to see in the world would come from not of imposing of certain ideas, idea of Camp Hill, or idea of Harvard, Vermont that Tom told us. The beauty, I think, comes from hearing the stories and being inspired by it, not making a franchise. McDonald's, basically, all across America. In the example of these more rural and farming communities, there have been racial minorities in the U.S. who have been oppressed and forced to work in farms, in cotton fields, in the farms in California, who the last thing they would want to do is to go probably work in a farm. Probably what they would want is an iPod or a computer. To force that upon them would be unfair. But they can be inspired by the stories that are told by Tom. They can be inspired by stories that we tell about Camp Hill. And from the inspiration can come their own version of what they can create through their own personal histories, through the history of their people, their ancestors, their communities. And I think you have to have really dramatic progress in humanity would come from peace. And peace would only come through the listening of the stories and telling it, of course, but the space in between, but not the imposing of one strong idea, which might be good, upon all others.
I ought to say a quick thing about what I thought was the strength of Camp Hill. I came to Camp Hill as a parent. My daughter has lived in Camp Hill for about 15 years. And one of the great things I take from Camp Hill is this ideal of care. Care for the land, care for ourselves, care for people, care for what we're doing. And that involves the art and all the other aspects. And the word care is the one that really resounds within me. It's also interesting when you read some of Karl Koenig's writings. He did not see what we are doing just to have one manifestation, the manifestation you see now in Camp Hill. He saw it much broader than that. We do, in fact, have a small place in Scotland called Symon, which is for elderly. It's for people who aren't necessarily within Camp Hill, but are from outside. We are building, out of the initiative of Copac, a very substantial place in New York. Camp Hill can do more than just care for its current population. It has the ability, through its experiences, through its understanding of what care really is, to provide care to a whole range of different populations. And I think that's something that we have to take away. Thank you very much.
God. Yeah, Tom, I deeply respect. Sorry. I deeply respect what you say, and but I somewhat echo Deitch's comments. I think, unfortunately, we probably are the quiet seed in the stable forest. I want to quote an immortal philosopher who many of you will be familiar with, called Jesse Ventura. In one insane moment of irrationality, the good people of Minnesota once voted for their governor. But when Jesse Ventura you know, he was asked about the subject of gays in the military, and I was so proud of the thing he said. He said, you know what, love is bigger than government, which I thought was philosophically a very important point, and it's a point that gives me tremendous hope. But I think if there's a technology which, and I don't want to sound like a Hallmark card, but if there's a technology that Camp Hill is based around, it's based around this notion that love is something that is a powerful force that has a real existence that cannot be destroyed or diminished. I think when someone writes a $50,000 check to somebody else, not with any expectation of return, but just with the expectation that something important can keep growing, and that reciprocity will be present, that's an expression of love. And I think we are a seed that has been quietly growing, and I think our quietness rests in, that's a power that you can't really shout about. It's a power that you can't really philosophize over, because it reveals itself only in real acts. And so I don't want to really talk about Camp Hill. What I want to talk about is all those other people that are doing great things out there, whether it be growing seeds, or whether it be in philosophy departments trying to really change the way that people think and perceive one another in the world. I think we have an important voice. I think it's a quiet voice. And I wish that we could be invited to different formats outside of our quiet spot in the forest, so that we could have more influence. But rapid growth will destroy us, because this is something that is somewhat tender and is somewhat inward and is somewhat quiet. We're not monasteries, but we're pretty close to the monastic movement. And I think it's our voice and our story that's important. We can't invite ourselves elsewhere. We can't. We invite people here, but we can't invite ourselves elsewhere. We need to be invited elsewhere so that our story can be told. And so that where we have something of value to share, it can be shared appropriately, and maybe help a little bit change the way that people think. So, thank you.
Susan.
We're good clowns together, aren't we?
We're very good clowns. Thank you very much, Sue.
More appreciation for the artist. Chris?
Yes. Our considerations concerning technology and the role and the impact it has on our life, it suddenly gave me a new thought with regard to the importance of eurythmy. Because through technology, we, by and large, do not any longer perform certain basic work gestures, like sweeping, like stirring, like raking. And it's a fact and with it there goes out of our lives something that is actually quite vital in preparing the ground for a return of my existence on the basis of what I have been able to do with my limbs and in my rhythmic system, my head. And so these work gestures no longer exist in the same way, unless you live in the Amish country, or you live in certain communities that deliberately decide to practice. And I had to think suddenly how eurythmy I hope many of you have had an experience of eurythmy. It is a new art and was created during the time of Rudolf Steiner's work. It has to do with gestures that express vowels, consonants, moods, and so on. Not in an arbitrary way. It is not just as you like it, but there are certain inner laws. And it gave me then to think how through eurythmy and this art of movement, maybe something is now able to happen in our time that stands in the, not in the place of importance, but it brings with it the quality that is able to make use of your limbs in a way as you used to in former times, because you did everything by hand or with your legs or whatever. And I was very grateful that we had this theme of technology and can also get going in finding out what is it that we can put into place in order to work with it and not against it.
We now are coming, we have 5 minutes, so I'm probably going to allow maybe 2 or not more than 2 more contributions, and they'll have to be brief. No, these are people are being thoughtful. That's good. Yes.
I want to express my deep gratitude and appreciation to all the people present and absent, visible and invisible, who have made this symposium possible, and for the warm and very well organized manner in which they have received us. Thank you.
Charlene gets the last word.
I want to say the talk was very good. It helped me a lot, including Judith. I like his too. And I wanted to thank every speaker who talked all this week and practiced. And I wanted to thank who came far away from here, from all north, to listen to all the speakers speak, and all the board members are here. Thank you for coming. Who's around here are far away. Thank you for coming.
And thank you.
So we come to the end of our 50th anniversary of the symposium. And I don't know if there's going to be 20 or 10,000 Camp Hills in the future, but today there are 10 Camp Hills in North America. And on behalf of all 10 of them, I'd like to extend my appreciation and thanks to all of you for being here to help acknowledge this moment. This symposium has been organized in a way that really looks more towards the next 50 years. Does not look back over the past. There will be other opportunities to do that in the year to come. But I do think it is important on such an occasion to at least acknowledge the past in a particular way. And I would like to do that by extending my appreciation and gratitude that I just now extended to all of you for being here. I'd like to extend it also to the pioneers who are sitting in this audience who actually were here 50 years ago starting our region. I will not name them because if I did so, they would be extremely annoyed with me. But there are a number of people sitting here for whom this 50th anniversary is particularly meaningful, and they know who they are. And we also know who they are. And I want to take this opportunity to thank them also. Thank you. So we embark into the future, and I believe that in doing so we have a new way of thinking. And this new way of thinking, I believe, no, I am convinced, has a capacity to take, for example, an apparent conflict between one camp who thinks that Camp Hill has something extremely important to offer the world and should do that in an expansive and rapid fashion, and another camp who is very concerned that such an expansion could be fatal for Camp Hill. That could appear to be a conflict, right? It's a little bit like, are we a mayapple or are we a weed? And I'm going to tell you, there's a new way of thinking. There's a new way of thinking that would recognize it's not a question of either or. Camp Hill is both. We've got to understand what aspect of it can be proliferated rapidly and what aspect of it can't. This is the new way of thinking. Striking the balance between the polar opposites and understanding the dialectic, if you will. So, thank you for helping all of us to achieve this conviction.
What about